Are you looking to scale up your healthcare solution in partnership with leading healthcare companies such as Anthem, Chicago Pacific Founders, Evernorth, and United Health Group, with over 200 million members? Applications are open for the 2021 UCSF Rosamond Adapt program. Startups developing breakthrough technologies that improve healthcare efficiency will receive $100,000 cash support and connections to payers. To apply, please visit rosamondinstitute.org. And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosamond Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Our guest today is Kevin Coloton, founders and CEO of Curation Health, an advanced clinical decision support platform. Kevin founded Curation to simplify care delivery after he observed the challenges of shifting to value-based care reimbursement structures. In this episode, Kevin talks about his experiences as the healthcare CIO for a Fortune 20 organization. He advocates for meeting providers where they are on a maturity curve towards value-based care. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Kevin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Christine. Great to be here.
It's sunny where we are in San Francisco, but where you are based in Annapolis must be nice weather.
It is. We finally have started the precursor of summer. This weekend we were out on the water, and it felt like summer is here. It was pretty nice.
Oh, that must be a treat. I think that's the best time.
I agree.
So let's start with your personal background and journey. I thought you have quite an interesting career path where you spent many years in management consulting industry that focus in healthcare, but you also work at Target.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about that experience as well. And, if you can tell us briefly about your background and how you grew up maybe and how those opportunities came along for you.
There's a lot there. I will try to be brief, but I've had a very interesting career path. 100% of it has been healthcare, but it's been an interesting path. So I grew up in a small upstate New York town, and my parents were both pharmacists. So all of my parents' friends and my early influences were all allied health, medical health related. And I was an athlete and injured frequently, found myself at the trainer's room quite frequently, and went to school to be a physical therapist. And I did that process, and it was awesome to learn clinical practice and bedside patient engagement and understanding how clinical care is delivered and the workflow and scheduling. Was wonderful, especially as a future entrepreneur. It was a great foundational experience. I practiced at Johns Hopkins for a number of years, and that was a wonderful environment to practice physical therapy in. And then ultimately, a few friends and I, this was 1998, formed an online healthcare education company. It was called Rehab Max, and we recruited a faculty around the world of high-quality educators, and we did online education. The problem is, and this is a great story of early entrepreneurial inertia, is we were a bit ahead of our time. High-speed internet was not widely available in the home, and we found most people don't enjoy taking online courses at work. So our momentum was slowed. Wonderful learning, though. I mean, it was a great learning. And one of the things I learned was, as a clinical background person, I really needed to get some business exposure. And that prompted me to go to business school and learn the fundamentals of how businesses operate and the language of business, which is incredibly different than clinical practice. So went to business school. That was a wonderful experience. And then I had my first opportunity in consulting, which was at the advisory board company in Washington, D.C. And I joined and was part of their team and did business development and presentation. And it was wonderful to get that early experience on how to sell and how to position and how to frame a product and an offering. And it was a wonderful company, great opportunity. Fast forward, I couldn't resist, and I went back again later, but we'll get to that. So from there, I went back to Hopkins. One of the things I really learned at the advisory board was I enjoyed best practices and research and the concepts, but I wanted to apply them. I wanted to actually say, yes, I have done operating room scheduling redesign, and I've run clinical departments. And I got an experience at Hopkins at the Bayview campus to run a number of different clinical service lines: oncology, orthopedics, OBGYN, neonatology. It was just a wonderful, really a 201 learning for me on how to do hospital administration and work with great peers. After a period of time, I decided I wanted more variety at that point in my career. So I went to Deloitte Consulting, had a whole host of different experiences, fast learning how that world works, and then ended my time at Deloitte doing clinical information systems, mainly Epic, the EMR installations at large organizations. And really the Deloitte style, which I think probably still is, was transformation. If you're going to spend that much money and have that much change, use it as an opportunity to transform how the operations run and how workflows run in an organization. So I learned a lot. My wife is a physician. She went to Georgetown Medicine and moved us to Minnesota for her first residency. And while at Minnesota, we had the opportunity. I had the opportunity to join Target, the retailer. Interesting. Timing is everything in life. It really is. And at Target, CVS had just acquired Minute Clinic, and Minute Clinic had started in Targets. So there was vacant clinic space within the Targets that needed to be redeployed into Target Clinic. So I was part of the team that designed Target Clinic and got to see it implement it and see it run. That was a wonderful experience. Really, for me, the best part of that was just, how does a Fortune 100 company run? And the scale of the enterprise, 350,000 employees and stores across the U.S., and the power of standardization, which is rare in healthcare, but very prevalent in those type of organizations. That was a great experience. I got later promoted to be CIO for healthcare for Target, so running pharmacy and optical and over-the-counter and clinics. And then my wife moved us back to DC for her residency, her second residency, and I joined one of my former friends from Deloitte, who had just started a consulting firm called Clinovations. And the premise here was, how do we do clinically oriented management consulting? So after an EMR has been deployed, how do you reconfigure it to maximize clinical workflows, adoption, and patient outcomes through configuring the tools and the systems and the workflows to maximize value? It was a great experience. And then across that journey, we found a technology where we would do HCC recapture. This is in 2012, 2013. So very early days of HCC and risk adjustment.
Can you maybe tell us what HCC recapture?
Essentially, risk adjustment, and you'll hear it referred to as RAF, is the foundational metric to measure the acuity of a patient population. So patients that are very ill have a higher RAF score than others. And there's a number of metrics used to measure that. One is you'll hear it as HCCs. Another one is STARS, HEDIS. They're different measurements. So if a patient has diabetes without complexity, they get a certain numerical value assigned. If they have diabetes with complexity, they'll have a higher numerical value assigned. So what our technology would do would find, what were they challenged by last year? And we would remind the physician the next year to revisit that diagnosis and assess, is it still relevant? Did the patient get better? Did they get more ill, et cetera? And that tool became pretty central to our strategy. We were acquired by the advisory board in 2014. That was my return to the advisory board in 2014. It was a time warp there. But it was great to be back, and it was wonderful that a lot of my old friends were still there, and it was a great experience. And then later, the advisory board was acquired by Optum. And many of our Clinovations alumni are still at Optum and having a very positive experience. So all in all, a very great journey. I departed in 2017 to take the journey I'm on right now, which is Curation Health. And Christine, what we're trying to do is there's a maturity curve associated with value-based care. And we can spend some time on value-based care. I mean, we would probably need a 10-hour podcast, but it is such an interesting transition that we're asking organizations to make. They've been practicing one way of medicine for 30 plus years. And on a dime, we're asking them to practice medicine in a very different way. The only thing that remains the same is engaging with the patient. But almost all of the other fundamentals shift. So on that maturity curve, Curation Health is seeking to serve organizations and meet them where they are in their maturity curve towards value-based care. Full prospective risk adjustment solutions all the way from that end to just helping them get started, understanding contracts and what are the key metrics and the milestones and what do workflows need to look like and what kind of teams do we need in our organization to maximize value-based care performance. And that's what we're doing today at Curation. That's my journey.
Right. Yeah, no, that's, it seems like it makes sense why you are where you are, because it kind of, all the experience that you had being in the provider side, being in the retail side, which is of the payer also, and then consulting, working with a lot of health system, it kind of is a sweet spot for you.
It's a variety. At the time, you wonder when you're charting your career path, are you taking too many tacks up the river? Are you not choosing the most efficient path? But I think general exposure is super valuable, especially earlier in your career, to have a generalist mindset of all of the different facets. And then over time, you can specialize. And I've chosen to specialize in different ways. And then I changed my specialization, which has been really fun, actually, and keeps it light.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Also, sometimes it also, you're risk takers in a way, not risk averse. Is that when your wife moves, you just like, okay, I'll move, and you'll figure it out along the way, and somehow you always find something that's meaningful for your career. And maybe we can, if you can, you briefly mentioned about what Curation Health. Maybe you can describe it more like a layman term. It's like, how is it? Like, who's your customer? And why your customer found that what you're offering is unique and really interesting for them or helpful for them.
That's Christine. It's an awesome question because of the complexity of the fabric of who our clients are and what they're trying to do. So the three phenotypes of our clients. Number one is health systems that are moving to value-based care or have been in value-based care for a period of time. The second phenotype are health insurers that either employ physician groups or need to partner closely with physician groups. And then the third, and interestingly, the fastest growing part of our portfolio are venture-backed or private equity-backed ventures that are seeking to go in the home. So serving patients in home-based primary care or home-based specialty care has been a very fast part of the growth of our portfolio. And what we do to serve those various audiences, because they have very different needs, is we seek to take work away from the clinical teams. Like, that's our goal. I think it'd probably be, if I can indulge you for a second to just give you a little bit of framework of the problem, then I can talk about how Curation is approaching to solve it. The problem is fee-for-service has been the predominant delivery mechanism and reimbursement mechanism for decades. And fee-for-service, it's fundamentally, you're rewarded for the frequency and intensity of your intervention. And value-based care's promise is, instead of rewarding for what you do and how many times you do it, why wouldn't we reward on the wellness or the benefits you're creating for the prospective health of your population of patients? The challenge is those are two very different worlds. So we're asking organizations to move from that legacy model, which if you think about it, all scheduling is based on fee-for-service, the infrastructure, the workflows, the clinic workflows, the technology, the nomenclature, the approach, the billing, the coding, the rev cycle. Everything is wired for the legacy approach. And we're asking mainly physicians to change all of the way they practice. Instead of paying attention to the 30 patients they have scheduled tomorrow, which is the typical fee-for-service model, you have to pay attention to the 2,000 patients you have in your care across a 12-month intervention. And that's a very different way of practicing medicine, thinking about patient management. And your infrastructure is not designed to serve that latter objective. So that's what we aim to do, is to try to make that equation easier. And interestingly, I know a lot of your podcast listeners are oriented to health technology and to entrepreneurship. And from a health technology standpoint, we have so much promise. It is getting better every day, and the innovations are leapfrogging our potential. It's absolutely awesome. But if you think about how it interplays with actual physician workflow, sometimes our excitement creates a burden on providers. And I think the best example is, just because now we have data, because we have EMR adoption at a higher rate, we get very excited about how many things we can measure, how many interpretations we can gain, and how many insights we can harvest and then deliver. The problem is, just because we measure something doesn't mean we should throw it at a doctor that has 7 minutes to treat a patient. So the key is finding those leapfrog technology innovations, making sure we have the right fidelity of what information does the doctor need at what moment in the care cycle, and how are they going to use it, how are we going to measure their use, and how do we measure the outcome. Instead of sending everything to them, which has been the tendency, how do we then send them the right data at the right time for them to act with effectiveness, and ultimately make it easier for them to serve the patient's clinical goal? And that's really, I just, at 170,000 feet, that's what we're doing at Curation. But to back down into how it works tactically. So let's say a patient is scheduled for a clinic visit or a telemedicine appointment or a home-based visit. Several days before a visit happens, we take information from the electronic health record, from the health insurer database or claims, from medication lists, from durable medical equipment orders, post-acute discharge summaries, CCDAs, whatever document exists. And several days before the provider is going to interact with the patient, we run it through our algorithms. And we've had the good fortune of doing this for a long time. And I have lots of alumni from my last venture currently with me on this one. And we've gotten very good at saying, instead of technologies like natural language processing and AI, which are making interpretations of words, our goal, and we use fundamentals of both of those technologies because they're incredibly powerful. We have a tendency to overemphasize algorithms that say they had this data point, and if you add it to this data point and this data point, the likely diagnosis is Y. Instead of saying, I found a word last year, I'm going to remind you that this word is probably still relevant. The challenge providers face is there's no contextualization of that. If you send them a likely diagnosis without contextualization, in limited time, their adoption and use of that is very low because their medical license is on the line, and it would take them quite a bit of time to research to create their own contextualization of that insight. So our goal is, through algorithms and human interventions and others, is to contextualize the recommendation. So when they see it, they're like, oh, this patient used to have this diagnosis. Now they likely have this because of an A1C value and these two medications and their comorbidity of X, Y, and Z. It gives them comfort that someone has done the preclinical administrative research to give that recommendation for them to act. And that's the second important part of our workflow. So we do all that before the visit. The second thing we do is we insert those insights embedded in their preferred EMR. And that's really important. There's a misnomer that EMR integration is a very broad spectrum, Christine. It's from, I bolted a pipe to the side of your hospital. It's on you if you actually access that information or not, all the way to embedding inside of the EMR through a certified API as a as a partner of the EMR vendor.
Mm-hmm.
And those workflows for clinicians can be very, very different. And we orient towards low inertia. What's the easiest way for the provider to access this information and then use it for the benefit of the patient? So we chose the route of getting certified by the major EMR vendors as active partners, where we are allowed to exist inside of their domain, which makes it really the adoption go way up. Once you have them click a link or go somewhere else or use a spreadsheet, the adoption has a tendency to plummet. So that's the physician's component. And then most of our organizations are in the growth phase of their value-based care maturity curve. And a big part of having effective workflows for value-based care is to also have an audit and a safety function. So we enable coders, medical coders, to review the physician's documentation and the corresponding code for accuracy, relevance, and compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's any deficits or any additions that need to be made, the coder partnered with the clinician can have those edits suggested to the clinician to reevaluate and adjust their documentation or coding if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the 3 steps. So taking work off by doing a ton of pre-work. I'd say most of our intervention is pre-visit to understand what the patient's truly challenged by and present those effectively and efficiently to the physician to use, physician's use of those tools, and then lastly, having a coder make sure that everything is accurate. And that's really the curation solution.
It's almost like you help the physician connect all the dots by the time they see the patients, and then they don't have to ask. They don't have to ask that many information from the patients because they already have it reminded already from what their previous conversation was.
That's right. And they can use their physician interaction to verify the insights rather than harvest them novelly.
Right.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
And we don't have the hubris to think that we're smarter than the physicians or our technology is better than physicians. I think for a period of time, AI had a tendency to orient that we're going to replace providers and it's going to be a robot seeing you now. And that's AI is super powerful for a whole lot of things, but it's not a replacement. It's more of an enhancement tool for physicians. And that's how we approach it is the physician would find the same things we would if they had unlimited time. But since they don't have unlimited time, how do we find those for them and present them in a way for them to quickly evaluate the relevance of this clinical disorder for the patient?
But the way I look at it, it's almost like if you have a to-do list, you don't have to remember all that. But when you see it, it kind of brought back all the memories, what you need to do. Then it spare your brain cell to do other things. I think that's what it is.
That's right. We talk about it a lot, Christine. It's reducing cognitive load. So the physician at the top of their license can make a final determination, but they don't have to do the novel research. If you think about a law office, it's kind of an interesting parallel. You have a paralegal that does most of the data collection and harvesting of information.
Right.
And a lawyer's scope of license is review and make determinations. We're trying to create the same model using technology and workflows to enable physicians to not have to do everything themselves.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier that your third customer is venture-backed companies that are trying to bring a home care, the primary care. Tell us more about that, because I think that's it's a trend that a lot of the care many wants to bring it to home.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Our chief medical officer, Dr. Matt Lambert, always talks about the return to the home for physicians. Right, that's how medicine in the U.S. really started, was the physician visiting the patient ill at home, and there's a return to that. But I think there's different drivers now than there were in the original genesis of medical practice in the US. So what you're seeing, and this is my opinion, but what you're seeing is a recognition that some patients have barriers to access care in traditional ways. And those barriers can be transportation. They can't get to the clinic that the physician works at because they don't have transportation. They can't do a telemedicine visit potentially because they may not have access to modern technology that allows a FaceTime visit or a web-based interaction. And there's also a barrier that some of these patients have such high acuity clinical challenges that they're not well enough to visit a clinic or another setting. So we're starting to see this new trend around visiting the patients in their home because you're recognizing they're not going to be able to access care through traditional mediums. And it's very effective for homebound patients or very chronically ill, highly acute patients to have these interventions in their home where they're most comfortable and where they're, in some cases, bound to not be able to access other mediums. You're also seeing a specialty orientation to this. So that's the home-based primary care where you're seeing the whole patient in their home, but you're seeing a lot of specialty care that's home-based as well. Kidney care and other disorders where highly specialized care is being delivered in the home to for these highly acutely ill patients to receive care. And since the specialist is in the home already, wouldn't it be great if they could take care of some of their other healthcare challenges since they're already engaged with the patient? So you're seeing those two as very rapid growth. There's a lot of companies also that have been very successful at managing these highly complex patients and comprehensively caring for them in ways that are not traditional to just a primary care visit, for example. They're almost specialty primary care where you're managing very ill patients. And there's a number of success stories in the industry of doing that really effectively. A bunch of them exist. WellBe Medical, ChenMed, and a host of others are the names you hear frequently in that space. But now we're starting to see a lot of these specialty care groups like Monogram Health and others that are doing kidney care in the home and really having strong interventions.
So they use the Curation Health similar way as how providers is using Curation Health?
Yeah, some of those names I named are not clients of Curation Health, but those that are seeking to care for patients in their home are looking for the holistic picture of all of the challenges that patient is facing. And specialty care providers that are doing home-based care are focused on trying to see a broader picture than just why they're there for a kidney intervention or others. They want to understand the global challenges the patient are facing. So we take a lot of the work off their plate by scanning the full records that exist through claims and EMR and lab and radiation lists and medication lists to show the complete picture for that patient so they can act.
And so I know before our time is almost up, but I want to touch base a little bit about the value-based and the fee for service and how, Curation Health has successfully in getting traction adoption from provider side. What do you see the trend like, how fast the provider side embrace the value base and what do they do for it? Because I think there's a lot of talk about value based for many years now.
Yeah.
And but obviously you have something that convinced them that what you're offering can help them be successful in this new market.
Yeah. I think, Christine, I'm not to make a controversial statement, but I think value-based care, the transition to value-based care is far more challenging than people expect. And once they start the journey, they realize the magnitude of change that needs to happen to be successful in that environment. So I think that's one of the reasons it's taken a long time. It's been a conversation because I think at its fundamentals, it makes a lot of sense, right? Rewarding on the complexity of care for patients and benefiting in wellness versus just intensity and volume. The challenge is that conversion is very challenged. I think if you look at the evolution, value-based care was traditionally the focal point of the health insurers. They were the first to sign up for value-based care contracts. And early days, they attempted to engage providers who were not financially incented to do value-based care to participate and to document differently and do different things. Appropriately, the providers didn't have real interest at that point in time in the evolution, but plans did. So plans created lots of interventions to be able to almost travel in the wake of the provider. So in previously documented encounters, they would harvest the notes to try to identify diagnosis codes and other indicators of risk adjustment and other factors. And they avoided or bypassed the providers by just harvesting these previously documented encounters. We're starting to see the entire industry understand that just driving in the rearview mirror doesn't create the full picture of what the patient is challenged by today. Mm-hmm. And if you really subscribe to wanting to help the patient improve their health, you need to know what they're challenged by today, not last year or 2 years mm-hmm. ago. So you're starting to see both the health insurers and the providers begin to embrace this prospective view of risk adjustment. So how do I help the provider understand the full picture today of what the patient is challenged by so they can manage the whole patient, but also get appropriate credit for the true complexity the patient has today? So we're starting to see that real shift, and we're starting to see organizations, and especially with COVID. So if you really think about how COVID impacted this transition to value-based care, those organizations that were 100% fee-for-service with declining volumes had declining reimbursement. Those that had a percentage or a majority value-based care were still being rewarded for the completeness of managing a population of patients. And therefore, they were more insulated from downturns of volume. So interestingly, many of our clients and our prospective clients are in the phase now where they're analyzing 2020 and seeing we need a balanced portfolio at a minimum where we have some fee-for-service, but we need a growing percentage of value-based care to insulate us from these type of downside scenarios. Now, let's hope we don't have another pandemic for a very, very long time. But it was an eye-opener, I think, to many organizations of the importance to have value-based care, at least as a component of your overall strategy. So provider adoption is corresponding with that now that they've seen that it can be of value to their overall patient portfolio of managing, both economically and clinically, because there was a lot of power with value-based care. Those that had the infrastructure already and had the ability to manage scaled populations did very well with COVID. They could scan their patient list and do proactive contacts to say, you're at higher risk of COVID, or we'd like to engage with you in a telemedicine visit because you have comorbidities that are impacted by COVID that we'd like to discuss with you. And there was real power there of those that were already doing some population management.
It's almost like you need to diversify your portfolio the same way as the company does that. And I think also, do you think eventually everybody will embrace the value-based and the fee-for-service will be the smallest, tiniest for something that is difficult cases?
I'm optimistic that value-based care is going to be the majority of care in the future. The Nostradamus challenge is predicting timing of that evolution. I think for some organizations, it's going to be a very long time, measured in decade plus, because they've just have an environment where fee-for-service just works for them. But there are many organizations right now that are quickly pivoting to value-based care. And I mean sea change migration towards these new models. And we're proud to be partnered with a host of organizations, both providers, large, complex health systems making that migration, as well as high growth, fast growth, home-based and others. So I think it's geographically dependent in large part how quickly organizations are incented or required to move to value-based care. But I think other organizations are just taking the approach that they are believing that this is the migration that's happening, and they want to get ahead of any of the curve. So they're making tons of investments in adoption, workflow redesign, and the technology to support it right now. But I think it's going to be the majority, but it's totally geographically geographically and culturally dependent, which organizations are going to move faster.
So do you think the the organization that embrace the value-based faster would be the winner or will survive better?
I think so. Back to your point about a diversified portfolio. I think if you're not balanced, at least with value-based care, I mean, the fastest growing segments of our programs, if you look at just a programmatic scale, what insurers are partnering with providers on, it's Medicare Advantage and it's commercial and it's other facets are the fastest growing of the portfolios. I think some organizations are just now on the starting line, getting ready to embrace these changes. And it's important to meet them where they are and provide them support and services to help understand how do you structure these contracts. And if you do structure a contract, what are your key performance indicators? And then what are the workflows you have today and what are the workflows of the future? And then what are the technology you have to enable the scaling today and what might you need to migrate to in the future versus some of the organizations are already there. They already have the technology and the support. Now they're looking for higher fidelity information with better performance that the physician doesn't spend half of their visit assessing, is this a viable recommendation?
Right.
They're spending their visit engaging with the patient to verify that these recommendations are accurate.
And usually they only have 7 minutes.
7 to 13 is the number we've seen used many times.
That 7 to 13 minutes is like no more than that. And if you get a lot of their homework done,
yes,
then they can be a lot more efficient as well. And then the patient also feel like they're not being rushed.
Yeah. At the end of the day, Christine, our culture at Curation Health is to find people that are signing up to building something meaningful. And we innocently believe that if we do our job, the physician has more time with the patient engaging rather than administratively researching.
Mm-hmm.
We believe the community health is going to improve if we're involved. That's what we subscribe to, is if we can help that physician deliver value-based care and comprehensive prospective care to a patient, that patient's health improves, and that just feels awesome. And that's the type of people we recruit to work with us at Curation Health. And candidly, that's usually the profile of our client, are people that are believing in that. So it's been a fun journey, and there's tons of value-based care opportunities right now, and it's a very fast-growing segment of the industry.
Yeah, and I think timing is everything. I think it's the right time. I mean, your first experience when everybody still don't have the bandwidth, but now I think it's there's a lot of technology that's been developed for other industry that the healthcare can definitely leverage.
Yes, as long as we use designed thinking to understand what does the doctor actually need.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a tendency to have technology and search for the problem. And in the case of value-based care, the provider's already overwhelmed. So exactly to what you said, what are those new innovations that are going to improve this? But then putting a filter through it to make sure that only the highest fidelity is getting to the provider at the point of care to act. And that's the delicate balance we face as a healthcare technology community, is finding cool insights out of industry and in industry, but then putting the lens on it of making sure that it's provider enhancing rather than provider burden creating. And It's a delicate balance. And we face it every day. We have a million ideas and we use a handful of them
right.
on a regular basis.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fun learning about Curation Health and a lot of good work that you're doing, and keep up the great work.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a great conversation, Christine. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, our content writer, Kelly Muscat, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.